Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna.
The second chapter of the Bhagavad-gītā is entitled The Contents of the Gita Summarized. And in this chapter, Krishna lays out the basic groundwork for understanding the rest of the Bhagavad-gītā. And among the most important statements that Krishna makes there, right at the beginning of Bhagavad-gītā, is today's verse, text number 16. I will recite the Sanskrit and then we can read the translation. Please listen carefully. Nasate vidyate bhavo na bhavo vidyate sataha bhayo rapi krishtam tas tvanayos tattvadarshati. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that if the non-existent, the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. Let's repeat that. Those who are seers of the truth, have concluded that of the non-existent, the material body, there's no endurance. And of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. This is Bhagavad-gītā as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. He calls his commentaries purports. So here we're reading the purport. There is no endurance of the changing body. That the body is changing every moment by the actions and reactions of the different cells is admitted by modern medical science. And thus, growth and old age are taking place in the body. But the spirit soul exists permanently, remaining the same despite all changes of the body and the mind. That is the difference between matter and spirit. By nature, the body is ever changing, and the soul is eternal. This conclusion is established by all classes of seers of the truth, both impersonalists and personalists. In the Vishnu Purana, it is stated that Vishnu and his abodes all have self-illuminated spiritual existence. Jyotingsi Vishnu Bhuvanani Vishnu. The words existent and non-existent refer only to spirit and matter. That is the version of all seers of truth. This is the beginning of the instruction by the Lord to the living entities who are bewildered by the influence of ignorance. Removal of ignorance involves the reestablishment of the eternal relationship between the worshipper and the worshipable, and the consequent understanding of the difference between the part and parcel living entities and the Supreme Personality of the Godhead. One can understand the nature of the Supreme by thorough study of oneself. The difference between oneself and the Supreme being understood as the relationship between the part and the whole. In the Vedanta Sutras, as well as in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme has been accepted as the origin of all emanations. Such emanations are experienced by superior and inferior natural sequences. The living entities belong to the superior nature, as it will be revealed in the 7th chapter. Although there is no difference between the energy and the energetic is accepted as the supreme, and energy or nature is accepted as the subordinate. The living entities, therefore, are always subordinate to the Supreme Lord, as in the case of the master and the servant, or the teacher and the taught. Such clear knowledge is impossible to understand under the spell of ignorance. And to drive away such ignorance, the Lord teaches the Bhagavad-gītā for the enlightenment of all living entities for all time. As we said, this is the first thing that Krishna mentions in Bhagavad-gītā that has philosophical substance, and it's the substrate on which every following instruction has to be understood. There's a difference between matter and spirit, just as there's a difference between this material body and ourself. We are spiritual beings temporarily inhabiting material bodies. Those material bodies are always changing. Krishna has already said, Komana Yoganam Jara. We're babies, we're youths, we become old, and then we eventually die. These are all changes that do not affect the soul. The soul is transcendental to all these changes of the material body, because actually the soul is transcendental to the body altogether. We are not these material bodies. This is the point. We are eternal spiritual sparks of consciousness. And only by our presence are these material bodies animated, such that they appear to be alive. Just like a car. If someone is in the car and turns the ignition and knows how to drive, then that car will be effective. If the person is not in the car is not going to move anywhere. Even if it's a Tesla, we have seen. So, this is the first thing. We are not this material body. We are spiritual beings. But why are we in this body? How do we get into this body? What do we have to do with this body while it lasts? That's what human life is all about. These are the questions that only human beings can ask. Animals cannot even think like this. So human beings should be inquisitive. Who am I really? These are the big questions, as we say. So Krishna is helping us because he's telling us right at the outset, through Arjuna, he's instructing us. Just like mother-in-law. She teaches the daughter-in-law by teaching the daughter. So Krishna is teaching humanity by teaching Arjuna. And this is his first instruction. That we have to recognize there's a difference between matter and spirit, and we have to identify ourselves as spirit, not matter. So, as long as we are attached to the idea of dominating this world through this body or mind, then we will have to run up a very high bill, karmic bill, and we have to come back again to pay all of our debts. So this is the ugly situation in which we find ourselves in. Karma chakra, samsara, the wheel of birth and death. So we should understand, first of all, that what is the difference between not only the body and the self, but what is the difference between something that is real and something that's false? This is the point of the verse. What's real cannot change, and what is false cannot endure. This is, even relatively speaking, this is true. We speak sometimes of classical arts, right? What defines something as classic? What makes something classical? If it withstands the limitations imposed by geography and by time. If it still has value over many centuries and across continents, then it can be considered something that's very classical. So that's a crude analogy, but the point is there. What is real is forever, and what's not real is temporary. So when we think in these terms and look around us and consider our priorities in life and what we're doing, we see this really lopsided, really imbalanced, because 90% of our energy is expended in something that is temporary and will not last. But while we're expending energy in these things, we're running up a high karmic bill, and we have to pay that bill at a certain point. So human life is a chance to understand these things and to rearrange our priorities and change our activities so that we can avoid the suffering that is imperative. As long as you have a material body, you're going to suffer, even if you have the best situation in this world. Even very famous people Actually, there was one Hollywood movie star. Somebody sent me a video clip of this. He was being interviewed, and he was very famous and he was very wealthy, and had all the things that make other people envious. But he was miserable, and he decided to kill himself. But he couldn't kill himself because he heard a voice out of nowhere. And what did the voice say? The voice said, this is his experience, it's not supposed to be easy. Would that we would be so fortunate to be guided. Most people never wake up. There's somebody behind all this, frustrating our plans at every step. What do we get in this world? We get birth, death, old age, disease. If you can tolerate those four, you still have to deal with miseries that your body and mind impose upon you, miseries that other people's bodies and minds impose upon you, and miseries that fate or nature imposes upon you. This is what you get until you die. And so one has to question, why does it have to be like this? And why do I have to keep dying again and again and again? Just when things get good, out. Or if things get really bad, then you're out anyways. I think it was Ernest Hemingway who said, they may kill you sooner or later, but they're going to kill you. So this is life, and a really intelligent human being will consider. Mundaka Upanishad tells us, Parikshya lokan karmachitan brahmano nirvena mayan nasya krita kritena tadgurum evadvigache samitani shrotriyam brahmanishtam. It means we should consider everything that life has to offer, and we should recognize that actually there's nothing here that's not temporary, because there's nothing here that's not the result of karma, either mine or someone else's. And what's the point of adding karma or subtracting karma from karma? You still end up with nothing but karma. But there is a reality. Why is it that we're eternally seeking happiness? Anandamayo. Why? Because that's what we are. That's our eternal nature. We are eternal, and we know we're eternal. Death is an artificial imposition. We don't have to accept it. But everyone wants to avoid it. An ant, if you put your finger in front of the ant, he'll go around. If you somehow or other threaten him, he'll let's try to find a way. Nobody wants to undergo the things that we're undergoing in this world. But we can't help it. Because there's somebody on top of us who's actually pushing all of this on. Why? Why is that? As we said earlier, the mother-in-law teaches the daughter-in-law by teaching the daughter. So we have to learn our lessons. One should come to question his existence. Well, it's one of those Greek philosophers. He said, an unquestioned life is not worth living. So Socrates, so that's the idea. So as Prabhupada says here, this is the beginning of the instruction by the Lord to the living entities who are bewildered by the influence of ignorance. That ignorance means, I think that I am this material body. I think that this material body can conquer material nature. I think that it's going to go on forever, or at least I plan as if it were going on forever. And every one of us is interrupted. Every one of us fails. Anyone here recognize the name John Maynard Keynes? Any economists here? He was famous. What did he say? The economists, they speak about long-term market predictions and trends and whatnot. But he said, in the long run, we're all dead. That's what you have to look forward to. Your money will stay in the bank, your car will stay in the garage, your wife will stay at home, your friends may come to the funeral, your body's going all the way into the fire, or the grave, as the case may be. But you're going on alone, and you don't know where. This becomes relevant when you're over 60 or 70. Then it becomes a reality for you, and you have to consider, really, I should know something by now. But if we waste our whole life just trying to pander to the whims of our senses, or the demands of other people and their senses, then it's not a life worth living, practically speaking, because dharmasya hina pashubhisamana, Hitopadesh tells us. Without dharma, a human being, so-called biologically correct human being, is no better than an animal. First, we have to become human beings. That means civilized human beings who understands what is right and wrong, what I should do and what I should not do, what is matter and what's real and what's false, as this verse is telling us. This is called dharma. So, human life alone affords us a chance to really understand these things, and therefore Jaimini Dharma Sutra begins, Athato dharma jignasa. And Shankaracharya considers that to be the substrate of Vedanta philosophy, the prerequisite course, as it were. Just like you cannot take a class in nuclear physics if you've not passed out of algebra, right? Not going to work. So, similarly, we first of all have to become not just biologically correct human beings, but ethically correct human beings, religiously correct human beings, spiritually correct human beings. And then we can start to talk about Vedanta philosophy. So this is what Krishna is trying to bring Arjuna to this point, because Arjuna is acting. What is Arjuna doing at this point? For those who don't know, Bhagavad-gītā is a conversation between Krishna and his friend and later disciple Arjuna. Arjuna was a great warrior, and Arjuna found himself facing his family members even in a battle at Kurukshetra, because it was a great succession struggle, you can say. Now we have inheritance struggles, family politics, but it's the same kind of thing. And so it was his duty to fight, but at the same time, I can't really fight my family members. So he was really anxious. And Krishna told him, look, you have to get off this platform of, calculating gain and loss and worrying about friends and family, and understand what's beyond all this. So, nasati vidyate bhavo. Things that exist, they don't come to an end. Things that do not exist cannot endure. This is the point that we're to learn here. And the spirit soul is what exists, because the soul doesn't change. What we are in the spiritual platform, that is what we are eternally. What we are in this material body from here and now, it's not forever. This time you may be a man or a woman, or black or white, or rich or poor, young or old, whatever the case may be. But you're not going to be that forever. Raise your hand if you were here in the same material body in exactly the same way that you are here now, 100 years ago. Not one person in this room was here 100 years ago, but you were here. This is why we make a distinction between, we use the word soul, I think even in this purport, brothers using it. But there's actually a technical distinction between the soul, which is a Christian concept, and the Atman, which is what we're talking about here at Bhagavad-gītā Vedanta philosophy. Soul is like a ray. Remember your algebra? What's a ray? Begins from one point and then continues forever. Okay? But what's the difference between a ray and a line? A line has no beginning and no end. So that's Atman. Whereas soul means more like a ray. So we should just take note of this. It's an important detail, although it's just a detail. But the point is that the soul has no beginning and no end. And therefore, whatever we are now is whatever we have always been, whatever we will always be. But that's not the case with this material body. So why invest everything in the wrong account? Why try to give so much attention to bettering our position on the physical platform when it's going to end in less than 100 years? Now, I'm not saying stop eating. In fact, we're going to feed you all in a short while. You have to take care of the body, that's okay. But don't invest your entire energy, 100%, into just things that are temporary. This is why I said in the beginning, our priorities should change to reflect our awareness of what's real and what's false. If we believe what Krishna is saying here, then that change should take place. That change of activity should take place. We should begin to consider, maybe I should base my decisions and my activities on this understanding instead of the false assumption that I'm just this thing, this bag of flesh and hair and pus and bones and everything else in there. You should think about this for a minute. Can anyone please raise your hand and name even one thing that emanates from this body which is actually very beautiful? Fragrant, maybe, or, tasty, perhaps. There's nothing. The body is actually it's a vile substances, as we said. It will rot. If the soul leaves the body, it will rot. Because that's what it is. It's just a bunch of chemicals. But the presence of the soul has such power that it will activate even this dead matter into what seems to be a living, breathing human being. It's amazing. So this is the power of the soul. And later on in this chapter, Krishna will explain all these things in more detail. For those of you who have not read Bhagavad-gītā yet, you can purchase a copy and educate yourself about the nature of the self. I'll avoid using the word soul. Nature of the Atma. We are this Atma. Ayam Atma, or Aham Brahmasmi. So this is the first instruction. And this Atma exists in two forms that Prabhupada is explaining in his purport here. Anybody remember towards the end of his purport what was Prabhupada making a distinction between two kinds of Atma? Huh? The small Atma and big Atma. It's a little bit like the difference between a drop of ocean water and the whole ocean. If a drop of water falls on your head, it's no big deal. But if the ocean falls on your head, so we are like little drops out of the ocean. And that ocean is the Supreme Atma, Paramatma, God, Bhagavan. What's another analogy given? Just like a gold mine and a ring or an earring or something made out of that gold mine. But the real source is there. That is Bhagavan. He's the source of this small Atma. What's the other third analogy is given? Just like a fire, you have a huge bonfire or furnace, and then you have a small spark that emanates from that fire. That spark can be put out pretty easily, right? So that's what happens to us. On account of our minute size, we can be overwhelmed by the other energies of the same supreme source, such that we forget our own identity. That's how we end up in this material body. From time to time, it's possible. This Anu Atma, or the small Atma, can be overwhelmed because Padasya Shaktir Dividhai Vishruyate, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad describes, this Paramatma, or the Supreme Whole, has multifarious energies. One of those energies is called Mahamaya, and this Mahamaya is in charge of conditioning these small fragmental souls who wish to misuse their minute independence. What do I mean by that? Minute independence. If you keep a dog on a leash, the dog can go pretty much anywhere he wants, but it's limited by the length of that leash, right? That's like us. We have minute independence. We can do what we want, but within our credit line, so to speak. Sometimes we want things and we can't get them. Why? Because we don't have sufficient credit. The karma is not sufficient. Sometimes we want things and we lose them because the karma runs out. Everything is temporary, including karma. And sometimes we want things and we get them, but then we find out that they're not really satisfying. And why does that happen? That happens because we actually don't belong here. Our real home is somewhere else. And we could get a sense of how that's true, but in general, we have such association and such socialization that we're not allowed to think like that. You're not allowed to ask big questions too much in society. You can, if you don't believe me, you can try going to work. Whenever you go to work next, everybody works from home nowadays. But just strike up a conversation with your boss about what human life is for, and who are we really, and why am I suffering? And you probably won't really get very far, because in human society, everybody is conditioned by these waves of Mahamaya's influence in the form of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And so, in general, it's not really very highly appreciated, the quest for understanding what's absolute truth. But we were quoting from the Mukunda Datta. If somebody considers all the options of life and becomes frustrated or disgusted that, what is the point of all this karma, then that person is actually fit to inquire from a bona fide guru, and that person should seek out a bona fide guru. This is something that Krishna tells Arjuna later on. We're not there yet, but for now he's just telling. What's the point of this? He becomes a little more specific to the context in the next verse, like 17. It says, Avinashi tutat vidhi yena sarvamidam tatam vinasham avyayasya nakaschit kartamarhati. That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy the imperishable soul. He goes on. The material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living entity is sure to come to an end. Therefore fight, or descendant of Bhagavad-gītā. Remember, we're back on this battlefield. Arjuna is a little bit, his mind is reeling because he doesn't want to have to fight with his relatives. Krishna is telling him, look, you cannot kill anyone. Neither you can be killed. Neither he who thinks the living entity is the slayer, nor he who thinks it is slain is of knowledge. For the self slays not, nor is slain. Then one of the most famous verses. For the soul, there's neither birth nor death at any time. He's not come into being. He doesn't come into being. And he won't come into being because he's unborn, eternal, ever-existing from evil. He's not slain when the body is slain. This is the first thing. So this whole, not the whole second chapter, but a large part of this second chapter is meant to, first of all, awaken us to our eternal spiritual identity. He gives the analogy of putting on your clothes. At the end of the day, especially in the summer, when your clothes are all wet and dirty, and you take them off and throw them aside, there's not much to be attached to there, is there? So in the same way, by the end of this life, when the body is worn out and doesn't really work anymore, old age we were discussing the other few days ago. What is old age? It means your body starts rotting while you're still inside. If you don't believe me, just wait. So then, this is the analogy Krishna gives. Nobody laments about their dirty laundry. In fact, you look forward to taking a shower and putting on a clean set of clothes. Similarly, when we die, we should not be so worried about that. People become ghosts because they're so attached to the body because out of ignorance, because that's all they know. They think that they're losing some essential part of themselves if the body is lost. But if we can cultivate knowledge while we are here in this human form of life, knowledge from Bhagavad-gītā, as these verses are discussing, then even at the time of death, we will not be bewildered. And he says this. Anybody know the verse? Dehi nosmin yatha dehe kaumanam yovanam jara tatha dehantara praptir tiras tatra namokhe. That means, in this body we can see I'm going from babyhood to youth to middle age, old age, and then eventually I die and get another body. But somebody who has cultivated self-realization as a human being when that happens, he's not bewildered anymore. He can go on effortlessly. In fact, he looks forward to better facility next time. Like moving. Everybody knows moving. When moving is a super hassle. Super hassle, moving. So much so that, you know, if you've moved a few times, especially if you're getting older, you don't want to do it again. So that's what it's like. It's like moving from one apartment to another. You get a better apartment, and there's some incentive to move. The body is like that. So these are some of the things that Krishna is telling Arjuna. And he's saying that even if you think that the soul is always born and dies forever, still you don't have any reason to lament. Why is that? Because as long as something is born, it's definitely going to die. Just as if something goes up, it's definitely coming down. So that being the nature of this body, what can you expect? Why do we lament at the time of death? You can't expect anything higher than death from this material body. That's what bodies do. So the real thing is that we should try to understand who are we really. This is called Atma-gyan. And Krishna mentions this in chapter 29, verse 29. It says, Ashcharivat pashyati kashyadenam, ashcharivat vadidithaiva chanyaha, ashcharivat chainamanya shrinoti, shrutvadyenam vedana chaiva kashyata. That means some people look at the soul as amazing. Some people describe the soul as amazing. Some people hear of him as amazing. And other people can't understand any of it, even though they try to. Anybody know why that is? Why is it that some people get it and other people don't? All these things we're saying about the soul. Some people are able to understand and other people can't. Why is that? Anybody have any? No.
So they perform devotional service in class.
He says that previously such persons who are able to appreciate spiritual knowledge, they must have cultivated this awareness in the past or rendered devotional service. And so it deals with them naturally. That's true. That's true. But some people have taken advantage of the human form of life and other people have not. And this is the point. This is the practical point. That while we can, we have to cultivate this knowledge of who we really are, and we have to understand the ramifications of that knowledge. Because whenever we get new knowledge, then we have to act on that knowledge. It's understood. Otherwise, what's the point? Not just armchair speculation, or what we call infotainment. So there should be a practical purpose to all of this. And that purpose is avoid suffering. Help other people who are suffering, better yet. This is the point. So these are the things that, these are the ramifications, I mean to say, of this very simple verse, but very deep verse. As I said earlier, it's the basis of everything that follows in Bhagavad-gītā. You take away this idea that truth is forever and illusion is temporary, and there's no basis to the discussion in Bhagavad-gītā. It all loses its importance. So this is one of the most foundational ideas here in the Bhagavad-gītā. There's a lot more that we could say about it. Srila Prabhupada, again, he's emphasizing that just as we mentioned, that you may have the ocean and the drop of water. So similarly, it's very important to consider the difference between the individual Atman, that's us, and the Supreme Atman, which is Krishna. Because our relationship should be master and servant. That is to say, we are the servants, and the Supreme Atma is the master. Just like a part and parcel is an expression that we find in Prabhupada's books quite a bit to describe the identity of the soul, or rather the function of the self. Part and parcel. It's like in my computer, there's a little screw in the bottom, but it's always coming out. with a computer. You have to screw it in and then it comes out again. You have to keep screwing it in. It's a small little part, but if that piece comes out, then the computer may not work anymore, or it may work very poorly. So the function of the small thing is to serve the large thing. Okay. So those who are seers of the truth concluded that in the non-existent material body there's no endurance, and of the eternal, the soul, there's no change. They have concluded by studying the nature of both. Anybody have any questions or any comments on this? Yeah.
Earlier on in the talk, you gave some, I wasn't directly here, but I was here. You mentioned something, Ernest, where you said that you get it sooner or later.
Yeah, I don't remember where this is from. Maybe one of these things. Yeah, no, the point is that we're all going to die. I quoted John Maynard Keynes, well, long run, we're all dead.
Okay. In the same context, you mentioned some celebrity was about to commit suicide and after it's not meant to be easy. How did that end up?
He didn't kill himself.
Yeah, I know.
That's why he was giving the interview.
Who was it?
I don't remember his name. Not very keen on this guy. We should understand the point. We're placed in this world and we experience so much suffering in this world because it's designed that way. And it's designed to make us question whether we made the right decision to try and exploit the resources of matter rather than serve the supreme whole, the supreme Atman. That's the point. If you want to make it as pithy as possible, we made an envious mistake. That's what it comes down to. And if we decide to rectify our part and cooperate or serve the Supreme Lord, then we're happy. And material nature will cooperate with us. But as long as we're trying to compete with the Lord and exploit his resources while evading his authority or his agents, then it's going to be tough. And Krishna says this much in the end of Bhagavad-gītā. I quote the other day, Machitta sarva durgani matprasadat trishyasi. What does it mean? You will pass over all obstacles in this world by my grace. Sarantu. Atachetvam ahankarat nashosyasi. If out of false ego you're acting without listening to what I'm saying, then vinamshyasi. You're gonna be wasted. That's the way material nature is. This Mahamaya plays hardball with us. Once I was in Delhi, and some kids were playing with a ball. It was a hard ball, but suddenly hit me upside the head, nearly knocked me out. So, Maya, God made me. Krishna's giving me some mercy. The material world is full of miseries just to make us question, do I really belong here? There has to be a better way to do it. As I said, why do we have to keep getting sick? Why do we have to keep dying? Why do we have to keep taking another birth? Nobody wants these things. We all try to avoid them. Any doctors here? No. That's why doctors exist. Nobody wants disease. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to get old. This is another thing you'll get nowadays. 30 years ago, nobody would ever think of lying to the extent that advertisers do now. But they actually claim we have a age-defying cream, ladies. It's mainly for the women. Age-defying, reverse aging, they say about these stupid things. Nobody's ever done it. You can't do it. It's designed like this. The question is why? You're supposed to think. That's how I took it when this actor said, he heard a voice that said, it's not supposed to be easy, Baba. You're supposed to think about, who am I really? Whether I'm doing it right, there must be some mistake here. That's the whole point. When we begin to question our existence, then we're ready for Bhagavad-gītā and can understand something. And as long as we're fine, then we're not going to take it properly, even if we do hear from Bhagavad-gītā. We'll take it as infotainment. But if things, yeah, you have a question?
Mentioned 90%, yesterday 90% of the time are things that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So does it mean that what we do on our day-to-day job doesn't matter? Start doing that something. Then you won't have computers, you won't have boss.
Right.
Like, how do you differentiate or try to create something versus things that doesn't matter?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question.
What's the question?
Now, you're saying that we were saying that 90% of our time is invested in things that don't matter because they're temporary, right? So his idea is that, well, you know, everything we're doing practically, I mean, we're driving cars and we're using computers and we're eating and we're sleeping and all these things, right? You have to do these things to some degree. To some degree, you have to do. So Bhagavatam tells us, all the Shastras tell us, you can do these things, but you have to do them in a particular framework, and that framework is called dharma. Because dharma is, you can say, it's like the user's manual for material existence. The Shastras, what the Shastras enjoin the simple thinking, high, what is it? Yeah, simple living, high thinking, sorry. It's Gandhi's idea as well. Simple living, high thinking. You take what you need. Ishalasya sarvam yat kinchit jagatyan jagat tena tyaptena punjita madhritha kasisutma. Ishopanishad tells us, take what you need only. But what we need and what we want, those are different things, very different things. What do we really need? We need maybe 4 or 5 chapatis every day, little sabzi, rice, philosophy, South India. And, you know, maybe 5-6 feet of, vertical space and 3 or 4, depending on how much you eat, of width. That's what we need. Some shelter, warmth. You know, I can imagine it gets cold here in the winter, right? So, you know, these are actual needs, and we all have a tendency to join with another human being and produce byproducts as a result of our fruitive activities, so to speak. Then that's also a necessity of life, but do these things under the regulations of what the user's manual advises. If we don't do that, and we act in adharma instead, which is mental concoction, then we're going to have problems, because it doesn't work any other way. Yes, Shastra Vitamutsrija Vartate Kama Kalakaha Nasa Sintinavapnoti Nasukam Naparangati. In chapter 16, text 23, Krishna says that a person who just dispenses with the Shastric injunctions, scriptural injunctions, and just does whatever he wants, whimsically, that person is never going to be successful, and he's not going to be happy, and he's certainly not going to get the supreme. So this is dharma. How to meet your actual needs, but in a way that elevates you rather than degrades you. That is valid. But to do more than that, it becomes entangling. And it just waters all of our false ego and cements our misconception, bodily misconception of life. Makes it worse, makes it harder actually, puts obstacles in our own path. So we have to live in this world as much as is necessary, but we have to try to simplify. Is that satisfactory? We're not saying don't eat. We're not saying don't sleep anymore. You know, don't get a house. You're not allowed to drive. But simplify as much as possible and really focus on doing things that elevate your consciousness, doing things that help you to make spiritual advancements, such that when the big door slams shut and you're pulled out of this body, you have relative assurance that you're not going to go down. You'll go up. Because in the eternal cycle of birth and death, this is the system. You have to keep learning lessons. You have to keep learning lessons, but you should be moving up. This is the point. Otherwise, the poet Kalidas in Meghaduta, he says, this life, this world, as it were, it's like a wheel. Everybody see these cars, sometimes luxury cars, they have many spokes. When the spokes are spinning, you can't differentiate between one spoke and another. In a split second, one spoke is on top and then just so fast it's on the bottom and then it's on the top and bottom on top. You can't even, it's not even significant to try to calculate how much time the spoke is at the top of the wheel and how much time is at the bottom of the wheel. It just doesn't matter. And our lives are like that. In the eternal scope of things, 100 years is nothing. And we have some statistics to back this up. Lord Brahma. How long does Lord Brahma live? Well, let's put it this way. We're in Kali Yuga right now. How long does this current age last? 432,000 years. And how long was the previous Yuga? Dwapara Yuga. 864,000. And the previous one? You get the idea. All this time, this comprises one Chakra Yuga, billions of years, practically, at least millions. And this cycle is going on and on and on. And Brahma lives through so many kalpas and so many long time. So in that eternal scope of things, 100 years is not significant. It's like the amount of time that the scope of the wheel is at the top. As opposed to the bottom. So this is why we should not become so riveted to this bodily misconception that we are currently absorbed in. We should try to think in terms of things that are eternal, and we should try to think in terms of who we really are and what we can be while we're human beings. Because we can only think while we're human beings. Once you get locked into a dog's body, only thing you can do is wag your tail and bark and eat. Prabhupada said, this is, a human life wasted means you go to sleep as a human being and you wake up as a dog. Imagine. You try to go brush your teeth after you wake up. You look in the mirror. You don't have teeth anymore. You've got canine teeth. You try to call your wife to get some help. And she sees you and shrieks. So, we're laughing, but it actually happens. These are people who are in these forms. Previously, they were human beings, maybe. Or they were, maybe some of them are coming up. It depends on the direction. Some people are coming up, some people are going down. But, the spirit soul is capable of much more than we settle for most of the time. This is the point. So while we're human beings, we can discuss these things, we can understand these things, and we can do something about it. Once we lose this short opportunity, window of opportunity that we call human life, which is maximum 100 years, then you're locked in. Wherever you're going, that's where you're going. You can't do anything. No more choices. Human life alone is a life of choices. So make wise choices. And that's why Krishna gives us the advice. In the end of chapter 16 of Bhagavad-gītā. Tasmat chastram pramanam te karya karya vijanata. Understand what is to be done and what is not to be done on the basis of what the scripture enjoins. Because that will elevate you, at the very least. Even if you don't go back to Godhead, you will not go down. That much is guaranteed. So, acharati atmana hashreyas. Do what is actually of super excellent value for your real self. This is human life. So Krishna is speaking verses like this one today, and he's just beginning his instructions here. But this is the basis. You are eternal. Eternal things matter. Temporary things are ephemeral. They're not really that significant, actually. And at any rate, it's not us. So we should not identify with this material world as much as we do. We should deal with it. We should be responsible. But we should understand that we have a duty in life as human beings, and we should get out of this ignorance. That's the point. I hope that's helpful. It's going on and on and on. Anything else?
Yes.
I'm
You mentioned earlier on the context of ghosts. Ghosts, I was under the impression that you can only become ghosts by committing suicide.
That's definitely true, that you will become a ghost if you artificially destroy the body that you've been given to work out your sentence, so to speak, karmic sentence. We can say we all have our lifespan is our sentence. It's the length of our incarceration within this mind-body complex. And if you artificially terminate that, that's a little bit like escaping prison. It's not allowed. So, yeah, you can become a ghost that way, but that's not the only way to become a ghost. If people die suddenly or in intoxicated state of mind or in various artificial ways of dying, then people can also become ghosts. If they're insanely attached, then they cannot give something up, then they will just keep hanging around. Especially if their descendants don't perform the proper rituals to free them from that. That's why we have funerals. That's the real reason. I mean, people do it as a social obligation now, but there is a spiritual purpose involved. In India, when the person dies, what do? They take the body, they wrap him up in cloths, and they take him to the burning god, and everybody's chanting what? Ram Nam Satya Hai. Just to remind us, what's real is the name of Ram. This body is not real. That's why it's not there anymore. It's going to rot, it will burn. And just to break that attachment, either your attachment or the previous occupant of that body, his attachment, then the son has to take something and crack the skull. You have to act on your faith. You can't think of doing something like that. That's what the Shastra enjoins. Dead body. The soul may be hovering around, still trying to, too much attachment for that particular body, so you just destroy it. Make it impossible. That's real mercy. Tough love, as they say. But sometimes it's necessary. Similarly, we mentioned in the beginning, that is why God is arranging that this material world is miserable. It's too perfect. It's just a certain amount of misery. Not so much misery that you can't tolerate it, but not too little mercy that you become totally overwhelmed by the false sense of enjoying this material world. There always has to be some sand in the sweet rice. Do they have sweet rice in the Sunday feast? Sometimes. So, it's nice rice pudding. Everybody likes, but if there's sand in it, it's not so nice. You see, so this material world is like that. It is too good. It is too carefully calibrated that you're not completely overwhelmed that you can't tolerate it, but you're not allowed to just become completely giddy and overwhelmed by it either. There's a certain amount of pain that has to be there, and that's all been orchestrated by the person who loves us more than anyone else, who is Krishna. So this is how the world is like this. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm kind of going off that.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand, what did you say about the funeral where they cracked the head?
Yeah.
With what?
Something sufficient to crack the head.
Before the
So, yeah, just when they're like started. Just to break that attachment. Because you can't stay forever anyway. The body's already dead. You've already gone. But still, we have this insane attachment. We're irrational in our desires half the time, isn't it? We're so irrational. So, a little sense sometimes has to be knocked into us. Shastra. What does Shastra mean? Shastra means scripture, but the verbal root is shasthatu. What does that mean? It's a weapon. The Shastra is like a weapon that beats us over the head with good intelligence. What to do and what not to do. If we follow it submissively, we make advancement. We'll be elevated. while we can be elevated. And if we ignore it, then we lose the chance. And we cannot be elevated once death happens, then we have to go wherever we deserve to go. Continue another chapter of material existence, suffering, this third death, old age, disease. So, we all have this false ego, like a ball and chain around our feet. False ego that impels us to do so many injudicious things in this world, and for which we have to suffer at some point in the future. Or even enjoy. Even if you do something good, that also requires you to come back into this world, and this world is by nature miserable. Dukkhalena shashvatam, Krishna says in Bhagavad-gītā. Temporary, miserable. So any birth in this material world, even if you have the best birth and the best facility, it's not like you're going to be happy all the time, we've already mentioned. Sometimes even the so-called happy people kill themselves. You have a question?
Just to understand, what's the easiest way to make the life successful?
Sorry?
What's the easiest way to make the life successful?
The easiest way to make life successful is to chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra and understand Bhagavad-gītā. It's simple. This Bhagavad-gītā kinchira dhita ganga jaladara khanika pita sakrita piyena murari samarsha priyate yasya yamena charcha. You don't have to have this unpleasant interview with Yamaraj, the god of death, after you leave this body. If you have even once studied Bhagavad-gītā, if you've taken a little bit of Ganges water on your head, or even once tried to nicely worship Murari, Krishna, then Yamaraj is not going to be so unpleasant for you. Otherwise, if you've not done these things, then it may not be so comfortable time. You get a tap on the shoulder, excuse me, step this way, please. We have to discuss your karmic account. You're in the red a little bit. We have to settle this. Or in this life, even if everybody knows how many people here have been in Saturn period. A little bit about Jyotish, astrology. Once Saturn is managing the administration of your karma, it can be pretty tough. His whole purpose is to just give you a hard time. If you ever wonder why nothing seems to be going right, just infinite delays, obstacles, difficulties, it's because there's somebody better than you who's making sure that happens. And we've all experienced it, even if we don't realize it, but everybody goes through this. So yeah, these are the Krura grahas, cruel planets. They're the ones who administer your bad karma, and the benefic planets are the ones who administer your good karma. But everybody has to undergo karma, and all karma entails this temporal, birth, death, old age, disease, death, all these things. Threefold mystery. Okay, so hopefully this is something to think about, and if anybody else has any other questions, we'll end here. Thank you all very much. All glories to Shri
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.